Imagine kings dueling, billionaires on their knees, and she merely smiling indifferently. Bella Otero, Europe's foremost mistress of the 19th century. She took money, humiliated men, and turned love into cold calculation. Why did the woman emperors worshipped die penniless and forgotten? Watch until the end. The finale of this story holds something you absolutely won't expect. He was repulsive. There was no arguing with it. His skin was like a gray veil on a rotten pear. His smell acrid, cloying, as if an ancient chest of centuries-old dust had suddenly come to life. He breathed heavily, sweated with every movement, and one could see more earth beneath his fingernails than in royal gardens. Yet it was this man, surrounded by the rustle of banknotes and the crystalline clinking of briefcases, who was repeatedly honored with her gaze. Why? Because he was rich. There were many like him. Some wore gold around their necks, others had it in their veins. Some traveled continents to reach her, others simply called her secretary. They were all united by one trait, and it wasn't youth, passion, or beauty. It was their fortunes. Colossal, indecent, monstrous fortunes. Fortunes they paid to buy the illusion of intimacy, the promise of touch, the right to a few minutes in her radiance. It cannot be said that she loved them. Love did not reside there. Mastery reigned here, filigreed, flawless, cynical. She, Caroline Otero, a dancer, an actress, a woman who was the embodiment of myth, knew the price not only of herself, but of those who crawled at her feet. For her, a man was not a face, a body, or a voice. He was a bank. The larger the deposit, the closer he could get. And in this lay her great, shameless honesty. She didn't pretend, didn't play at romance. "The Baron is not handsome," she once said, "but it's unlikely a woman would call a man who makes such gifts unattractive." None of her patrons were objects of desire, but each was a step on the ladder to her independence, to a freedom so rarely afforded to women of her time. At light, against a backdrop of velvet and gold, she seemed a goddess. But if one looked closer, another quality could be perceived. The cold gleam of calculation in her eyes, like the facet of a diamond. She accepted gifts, smiles, vows. She accepted lives laid at her feet as tribute. Some would depart this stage by their own volition, all for the sake of one woman whom one could not buy, but could rent for a very, very high price. He presented her the necklace of a former empress of France, a delicate weave of black pearls with a precious clasp once belonging to Eugenie de Montijo. Another gifted her earrings that had once adorned the ears of an Austrian sovereign. Someone retrieved from a family treasury a necklace that Marie Antoinette herself had worn to balls before her final autumn. These were not mere gifts. They were acknowledgments of power, symbols of surrender. Each time she accepted a piece of jewelry, a man surrendered without a fight. They approached her like pilgrims to a shrine. Every gesture was made with awe, a kiss of the hand with bated breath, a smile like a reward for endurance. Men whose signatures the stock exchanges awaited, who could command armies, transformed into youths, adrift in life's rhythm the moment they found themselves in her presence. In the hall she entered last, but she was noticed first. There was something in her movement beyond grace. It was an omen of disaster.
Caroline lived in a world where a man's attention was a resource, but she knew how to turn that resource into hard currency. Not just money, but symbols of power, legends. She wasn't loved. She was worshipped, desired, anticipated. She had no rivals, only spectators dreaming of one day being in her place. But few understood the price of that position. Otero didn't ask, didn't haggle, didn't grovel. Everything came to her naturally, with flowers, jewelry boxes, letters, envelopes where stocks and diamonds lay instead of words. She was a catalyst for male madness, and it seemed she reveled in it. Men accustomed to submission became supplicants at her feet. Kings accustomed to adoration desired to worship themselves for a night. She could appear at the theater in an outfit that had no fabric, only precious stones laid directly on her skin. She could outshine a ball without uttering a word. Even her silence cost a fortune. And if someone dared to speak of her past, her origins, her journey, they quickly learned it was futile. Because all that mattered was the moment, the instant her gaze met theirs. And if you were caught in that look, you had already lost. In those years, it wasn't just women who envied her. Monarchs envied her, because she possessed what even they could not buy: absolute control over the desires of others. She was perhaps the only woman of her time who used men with the same ruthlessness they had used women for centuries. And this made her dangerous and coveted. In their society, she never looked like a guest, more like the hostess. Emperor Nicholas II, barely accustomed to wearing a crown, already cast glances at her that reflected both youthful rapture and imperial bewilderment. The king of Serbia, weary of courtly intrigues, found respite from his crumbling world in her smile. Albert I, Prince of Monaco, before meeting her, thought ruling a resort paradise was the pinnacle of pleasure. But it turned out true paradise was the moment she agreed to sit beside him. Edward VII, the monarch of the British Empire, majestic and weary, could not resist her gaze, which held not a trace of submission. King Alfonso XIII of Spain, raised in the spirit of chivalric rigor, allowed himself to be a boy with her, dreaming not of a crown, but of permission to stay until morning. Kaiser Wilhelm II, a man who held Europe in his hands, lost his grip at the sight of her. Even him. Baron Ohlstetter, an industrial titan, a man without a face, but with an empire of factories, dissolved beside her in a faceless tremor. Aristide Briand, the politician, architect of change, forgot his speeches, his cabinets, his elections. He simply came, sat, waited, like a boy outside his elder sister's door. And Gabriele D'Annunzio, the poet, the hero, the lover of all Europe's stars, he who sang praises of bodies and passions, found in her not a muse, but a flame that burned without inspiration. He wrote poems, but not about her, because the language was too poor to express what she had turned him into.
Caroline gathered men around her like a collector of relics, but these were not just names from society pages. They were powers, symbols, each one a figure on a chessboard, and almost every one a pawn in her game. They were united not by power, titles, or status. They were united by powerlessness.
before her. Before she who had no royal blood, no noble name, no patrons, only dance, only a body, only a mind. And this drove them mad. That a woman whose life began in poverty, in the dust of border villages, became a figure before whom those who themselves decided the fate of nations bowed their heads, this was a challenge. The world of the Belle Epoque was a shop window. Everything had to be beautiful, exquisite, refined. And she was real, and too dangerous. Men tried to confine her within roles, favorite, concubine, actress, but none of them held. She slipped away like Mercury, today in the opera box, tomorrow in a room with the Shah of Persia, the day after on the poster of a Parisian cabaret. Elusive, unbowed, always a little further than they hoped. And it was precisely this that made her even more desirable. When her name was spoken in New York, no one was surprised. Bella Otero had long ceased to be merely a European phenomenon. She had become a symbol, almost an abstraction, the embodiment of desire that recognized no borders. And where desire knows no distances, men appeared, ready to overcome them. William Vanderbilt and Paulo Sartori, two titans from the New World, carried empires on their shoulders, but were unable to carry one thing: her absence. They crossed the Atlantic not for partnerships, deals, or territory. They sailed for a woman. She did not embrace them. She did not promise reciprocity, but she accepted them as goddesses accept gifts. Each of them knew he would not be the only one, not the main one, not the last one. And still they came, because meeting her was a form of communion, not with love, with immortality. Even if fleeting, even if the price was a year's profit or ancestral jewels. The love stories that surrounded her resembled a chronicle of obsessions. Some ended silently, an emptied purse or a loss of interest. Others tragically. There were those who left forever, unable to bear her silent refusal. The society press loved this theme. In every issue, another admirer who shot himself in the chest. Two fought a duel, as if the times of the musketeers had returned, only to die at her feet. The newspapermen didn't always write the names, but the names weren't important. She was important. Caroline didn't provoke, she simply existed. And that was enough for men educated, reserved, brilliantly educated, to lose their bearings. Her indifference shattered behavioral patterns, social norms, the fear of death. She didn't shout, didn't humiliate, didn't promise. She looked, and that was enough. The world of the rich was always a world of the bored. Everything was permitted, accessible, predictable. And Otero was the only thing they couldn't control. She couldn't be bought forever. She couldn't be obliged. She didn't promise to stay. She promised nothing. And in this lay her unbearable allure. She didn't need. Not them, not their power, not their protection.
Men didn't go to her for affection. They went to feel alive, even for a moment, even in an illusion. And the price for this sensation was sometimes monstrous, but they paid, because even a tragedy with her name in the finale seemed sweeter than a life without her name at all. They tried to appear important, witty, manly. They wore their best suits, spoke in aphorisms, gifted rare wines, sent flowers carved from ivory. And she simply waited, not for the one who would be younger, more beautiful, smarter. She wasn't interested in topaz-colored eyes, the shoulders of an athlete, or Oxford diplomas. She waited not for a person, but for a sum. To appear in society with Bella Otero, magazines wrote, one must be either very influential or rich, or both. And this was not an affectation, a mask or cruelty. It was the logic of survival. For a woman born in dirt and hardship, with hands that washed laundry until they bled, love was a luxury, money, protection. In a world where you could be sold if you didn't sell yourself, she chose a price, and she kept it high. Those who tried to lower her value fell out of her circle. Those who agreed became temporary owners of touches, words, images, but never of her herself. She didn't hide this, she spoke of it openly, and this is what infuriated men the most. She didn't feign modesty. She didn't play along with the illusion that feelings were the main currency. On the contrary, she exposed the rules of the game, set the terms. It was a trade, frank, almost indecent in its transparency, and yet skillful. No one felt used. On the contrary, everyone left with a sense of victory. And only later, months or years later, in empty halls and expensive homes, did the realization dawn: they were the product, not her. If any of her admirers were outwardly attractive, it didn't help them. Without capital, without a symbol of influence, without a gift exceeding common sense, they remained unnoticed. She didn't reject the ugly, she rejected the poor. And this made her a particularly fearsome figure for a society built on gallantry and pretense, because she swapped concepts. Beauty ceased to be currency. The man ceased to be the hunter. The woman ceased to be the prey. In those years when duels, codes, modesty, and kid gloves still existed, Caroline was a spit in the face of conventions. But she didn't shout or provoke. She simply accepted, as if it were natural, as if jewels falling from the hands of a trembling baron were the natural outcome of desire, as if the Shah of Persia, bringing her ritual offerings daily, was part of her schedule, not a miracle. And perhaps it was precisely this composure that drove men mad the most, because she didn't need them emotionally, and they needed her to the point of pain. They were old, they were ugly, and at times simply unbearable. Baron Olstetter, with a face resembling a crumpled wallet, had manners that sent a chill down the spine even to waiters. The Shah of Persia, whose body exuded such a thick scent that it sickened even the servants, was terrifyingly meticulous. Precisely at 2 p.m. he entered her apartments. Precisely at 5 p.m. he departed, to the sound of janissary footsteps, not a minute earlier, not a second later. These men were like furniture in a temple, heavy, expensive, and immovable. But she accepted them, without disgust, without pity, without delight.
Her indifference was not a stone, but an art. Not everyone could withstand it. But those who did received a reward. A few minutes after the Shah's departure, his chamberlain entered the room. He said nothing. He simply knelt and extended a cushion on which lay a golden casket. Inside, a ring, earrings, a pendant, unique as meteorites that fell in her honor. She took them, did not smile, did not thank him, because gratitude would imply that all this was for feelings, and there were no feelings here. This was a transaction. The Shah forbade her from speaking words of gratitude, not because he was cruel, but because he wanted to believe everything between them was real, that she waited for him, that she longed for him, that she trembled in anticipation of each visit. And Caroline, as experienced as a diplomat at court, never destroyed this illusion. There was respect in this too, or perhaps even pity, because she understood how thin the line was between a man's pride and his downfall. She didn't ask the price of a gift. She didn't inquire about the origin of diamonds. She didn't persuade them to stay. These were not romantic encounters, but hours of work, but hours with a precise inner note of theater. Everything was measured, everything had a ritual, and it was precisely this that disarmed, because in this spectacle, the stage, the spotlights, and the script belonged to her. Men were left with only one thing: to applaud. Baron Ulstetter once staged an entire performance for her. Petals lay on the marble steps of his palace, and Beethoven's quartet played from the windows. She emerged from the carriage, glided across the carpet of roses, looked at him, and walked past. He was grotesquely ugly, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that he had paid. He had earned his evening. He got what he wanted, and she what she needed. This repeated again and again. Their faces faded from memory. Their scents, no. Their fortunes were remembered. Each name that gifted a jewel disappeared into the general card file of the wealthy but unremarkable. For Caroline, these were not people. They were sums, and in this lay her protection. Because if one started to differentiate, one could start to feel. And to feel in her profession was dangerous, too dangerous. When he entered her room, it smelled of fresh snow and Russian spirit. Grand Duke Nicholas, young, high-ranking, unbalanced. His eyes blazed like those of a man standing on the verge of something impossible, between adoration and obsession. He didn't speak much, simply locked the door, simply posted guards, simply decided that she now belonged to him, forever. This happened during her tour in Russia. Her dances were adored, her posters drew crowds. She was an exotic pearl in gray St. Petersburg, a spark against leaden clouds. But now she was not in the hall. She was in a room, locked from the inside, without the right to choose, without the right to exit. He had power. She had a window, small, icy, like a last chance.
She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She simply found a way out, however humiliating, however dangerous. One day, when he was absent, she decided. She climbed out through a narrow gap, in just a nightgown, straight into a snowdrift. The cold was like a blow. The air cut her lungs. Her back burned from the snow, as if from boiling water. She ran. She escaped, not from the prince, from the very fact that someone had once again decided they could own her body, her time, her decisions. This escape cost her dearly, literally. Doctors would later say severe inflammation, fever, months in bed, 3 months of silence, 3 months of pain. But even lying under the blankets, she didn't break. She didn't blame. She didn't complain. She simply remembered. Another who tried to turn her into property. Another who forgot she could only be rented, not kept. And yet, strangely enough, there was truth about her in this episode. About she who was never weak, who could be vulnerable, physically, bodily,
even socially, but never psychologically. Her consciousness was her fortress, her will an army. She knew she could lose her body, but never her freedom. And the prince? He remained there, in the room with the open window and the trampled pride. He never understood that he hadn't lost to a woman, he had lost to an idea. He had lost to the times that birthed women like her, fast, gliding, elusive, those who never become anyone's property, even if offered the world for it. Some called it a whim, others art, but even among her most daring escapades, there was one episode that caused shock even in the jaded Moscow. She didn't just appear, she was presented on a silver platter, like dessert, like a mirage, like a jewel off the menu. It wasn't a performance or a spectacle, it was a gesture, silent, predatory, frighteningly beautiful. And in this lay the essence of Bella Otero. She wasn't invited, she was presented, as one presents a treasure brought out once a century. She lay there, silent, looking, and those present, accustomed to abundance and extravagance, suddenly lost the gift of speech. For a split second, every man in the hall understood this was not a woman, but an element. She could not be tamed, domesticated, or known. She could only be experienced, and far from everyone survived that experience whole. No one knew how much it cost to arrange this evening, how much the servants, the silver platter, and the security cost. But that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was the sensation, the shock, the delight. She created moments, and that moment was worth more than anything ever sold at auction, because it was unrepeatable. It could not be secondary, repeated, or copied. Only once, only here, only for those who paid. Otero owned not only bodies, but also time. She understood, if you control the moment, you control everything. The stage was her arena, and the audience her currency, but an unstable currency. Therefore, she turned every appearance into a legend. Not a gesture of hers was accidental, especially if it seemed capricious.
And in those moments, when the audience forgot where they were, who they were, and what century it was outside the window, she won. Not money, respect, even if mixed with fear. Because they respected her not for her beauty, grace, or title, but because she ruled the stage like a monarch who needed no crown. One glance from her replaced dozens of monologues. One step of hers, an entire play. She didn't need a theater to play. She didn't need a director to stage scenes. Everything she did became a myth, even if it was just an evening in Moscow salon where she was presented on silver as a challenge to civilization, as a statement, you wanted to be gods, and I am already a goddess. On that August day in 1898, the air of St. Petersburg trembled with humid heat and subtle tension. In the frame, her dance. The corset tightly cinched her waist, her steps precise, her gaze daring. Just a few seconds. The black and white film captured the movement of her body, as if history had frozen to bow down. French cinematographer Félix Mezguich didn't know he was filming the first movie star. He was simply filming Bella Otero, and that was enough to provoke a scandal. In the background, an officer of the Imperial Army. His appearance proved fatal.
When the footage was shown in one of the halls of St. Petersburg, the audience erupted like dry straw. "Indecent!" cried some. "State humiliation!" echoed others. Mezgish himself was expelled from the country. The film was destroyed, but its ghost remained, and with it her name, Bella Otero, the woman whose dance was more dangerous than political manifestos. On stage, she didn't just dance, she transformed. In costumes more resembling jewelry installations, she turned each appearance into an act of sorcery. One of her most famous costumes included precious stones glued directly to her chest. No fabric, no clasps, only skin and light. It wasn't vulgarity, it was an assertion. Here I am, all of me, without fear, without protection, without the right to lie. Men went mad, women indignant. But whatever they said, they came. To watch, to admire, to condemn. She was the focus of the era. People went to her as they would go to a volcano, knowing it was about to erupt. And there was something deeply human in this, a pull towards catastrophe that was impossible to resist. They spoke of her in whispers, then loudly, then with bated breath. But even when another scandal tried to knock her off her pedestal, she remained up there, because each scandal only strengthened her status. A woman allowed what others were forbidden, a woman who did the impossible and emerged from it as if from a theatrical curtain without losing an ounce of dignity. Thus, she became not just a symbol of the Belle Époque, she became its challenge, an age of jewels, style, manners, and a breakthrough. Because in this breakthrough woman, there was nothing fake. No gestures, no falls, no rises. Everything on the edge, everything on a breath, everything in plain sight.
They say the domes of the Carlton Hotel in Cannes were designed in the image of her bust. The architect supposedly glanced, was dumbfounded, and realized, yes, this is exactly how the roof of a building greeting the world's most powerful should look. No one, of course, can confirm this documentarily, but there is truth in such a legend, because Bella Otero truly left a mark not only on hearts, but also on stone. Her forms, gestures, silhouette, they became architecture, fashion, history. At the beginning of the 20th century, she was not just a dancer, she was a symbol of luxury, an icon of the body, a woman icon whose name could be spoken like a prayer if you wanted luck, or a curse if you lost a fortune trying to reach her boudoir. And she lived extravagantly, as her admirers, the stage, and an innate passion for excess allowed. At one point in her life, Caroline owned 68 million pesetas, a yacht, and even an island. These were not metaphors, these were assets. In Paris, she resided in a mansion that could adorn a museum. 15 servants, a personal secretary, grooms, dressmakers, valets, and a car, one of the first in Europe. A gift from the Dion Bouton firm. The car was designed so that her feathered hairstyle wouldn't snag on the ceiling of the cabin. Imagine, engineers adjusted the bodywork to fit a star's hairstyle, not to aerodynamic laws, to the curves and height of a woman's head. She appeared on the streets like a mirage, in gold, in furs, with earrings that weighed down her ears like weights of power. No one knew exactly how much her jewelry cost. Too much. There were stories of a pearl necklace weighing about 2 kilograms, formerly belonging to Empress Eugenie de Mongico.
The necklace wasn't worn around the neck, it was worn like a cross. It was a symbol. I am she who can afford the impossible. Monte Carlo became her second stage, but there, in that realm of roulette and absolute risk, she was not an actress, but a victim. Gambling captivated her no less than men, and while in love she chose, before the green felt, she lost without hesitation. Money flowed through her fingers like champagne spilled at someone's wedding, luxurious, expensive, and inevitably spilled. But in this was her entire being, a woman who couldn't exist at half strength, who couldn't save, not feelings, not gestures, not money. She lived as if every day was her last, and every appearance an encore, and that is precisely why she was adored, and precisely why she was feared. On board the yacht Lysistrata, everything was arranged as in a myth. White tablecloths, heavy glasses, the gleam of expensive tobacco, and conversations where every name was like a chapter from a world economics textbook. John Rockefeller, Henry Ford, Cornelius Vanderbilt, each of them a pillar, a titan, a sovereign. But that evening, titles and capital disappeared because she entered the room. Caroline emerged barefoot, without trains, without crowns, without theater, only her body, only her steps, only a gaze that could turn one to ash. She performed a gypsy dance, not a staged one, but one that came from the depths, from the heat of the blood. At that moment, the billionaires watched not as shareholders, but as children. She matched her rhythm to breathing, sparks of light to curves, and the entire ship froze, not from the waves, from her.
When the music stopped, Vanderbilt didn't applaud. He knelt and kissed her feet, slowly, solemnly, and then whispered, "Allow me to adore you." It was a moment that in itself was worth a fortune. A man capable of buying a country begged for love from a woman whose value could not be calculated. That night, he offered her his yacht, in its entirety, captain, crew, route, interior, everything, so that she would agree to be near him. She refused. Not with malice, not out of pride. Simply, she didn't like it. "It disgusts me," she said about the yacht, and went to play. That same night in Monte Carlo, Caroline lost 8 million francs. 8 million scattered on the green felt like petals thrown at the altar of her passion. Her life wasn't divided into luxury and destruction. For her, they were one and the same. The same impulse, the same logic, to get everything and immediately burn it. She didn't accumulate, she demonstrated. Money for her was not a goal, but the light of a spotlight in which she revolved. The brighter it was, the faster she burned. This episode is the quintessence of her myth. Men capable of reshaping the world map became extras in her personal play. Her movement was more important than any shareholder report. Her silence was louder than any political speeches. She didn't seek them. They sought her, and each knew he might be humiliated, rejected, ruined, but still he would come. Because she didn't give love, passion, or sex. She gave a feeling. You are near power, magic, the impossible. Even for a moment, even for a yacht, even for 8 million. Every action, every word, every gesture, like a thrown challenge. She left no ruins behind. She left madness. One banker, not a minister, not a king, but simply a man with numbers in his eyes,
offered her a fortune for half an hour alone. The sum was not stated, but from the reaction of society, one could guess the world shuddered. And she just smiled. It wasn't the first time, and of course, not the last. Men paid for the illusion, for the chance to be chosen, for a randomness that she passed off as destiny. Even her kindness humiliated them, because she never pleaded, never needed, never held on. And this destroyed everything the familiar world was built upon: love as dependence, woman as a shadow, man as the pinnacle. Carolyn broke this model, not with slogans, not with struggle, simply by existing. One of her favorite phrases sounded like an aphorism, but it held the pain of thousands of stories. Fate comes in dreams, but not when you sleep alone. Words spoken half in jest, revealing the truth. Even she, fateful, calculating, unattainable, still lived in a world where loneliness was not a privilege, but a sentence. A man could be alone, and it was called freedom. A woman, and it was called tragedy. And in this internal contradiction, Bella Otero lived every day.
She didn't die inside from the fear of being alone, but she didn't deny that closeness was power. Only her closeness wasn't bought with affection or devotion. It cost the entire world, sometimes literally. She wasn't interested in romantic formulas. She knew a man would be near as long as he could afford to pay. As soon as the money ran out, he would disappear, which meant one had to take now everything, brightly, without a trace. Passions swirled around her like tornadoes. Ships, fortunes, careers, everything collapsed or soared at her whim. She didn't ask permission. She didn't ask for forgiveness. Her presence changed not only men, but also space. Wherever she appeared, gazes, rumors, legends immediately flocked. Where before there was boredom, a fever began. Bella Otero was not about feelings. She was about consequences. After her, life never returned to its previous course. Like after a thunderstorm, after a fire, after a love you'll never receive again. Those who thought she was just a beautiful woman quickly realized they were mistaken. This wasn't just a woman, it was an element which had no morals, no pity, no boundaries. During World War I, she danced not in cabarets, but on the front lines. Performances for soldiers, for the wounded, for those who had days or hours left to live. She wasn't a front-line symbol, but something more. A shard of a world where beauty, light, movement were still possible. She didn't need ovations. She came, she moved, she disappeared. Like a swallow against a backdrop of smoke. Like a reminder that even in hell one can breathe. But the war left no illusions, no audience behind. When it all ended, she left the stage, not dramatically, not tragically, simply like a person who understands the sky no longer looks at you with the same interest. Everything she had created vanished like a shadow from a spotlight when the light was turned off. She no longer belonged to the era because the era had ended. Her fortune, once astronomical, slipped away like water through fingers. Casinos, yachts, houses, everything disappeared with the same speed it once arrived. Her house in Paris now seemed too large, too empty.
Carriages no longer arrived at the porch. Letters no longer smelled of perfume, but of bills. Imperial gifts were sold to pay bills. Secretaries became creditors, servants witnesses to her fall. Nice became her last refuge, not longer as a resort, but as a shelter. Once she owned an island, now she lived in a tiny apartment. Once her name was a password for kings, now her neighbors simply called her Mademoiselle Caroline. She didn't grumble. She didn't write memoirs with cries of offense. She simply lived, looked out the window, listened to the sound of the sea, and remembered. Her last diamond was not on her neck, but in her eyes. Her last admirer, her own pride. She didn't die as many would have wished, not in madness, not in agony, not in repentance. She departed quietly at the age of 97, after a long journey filled with ascents, adoration, losses, and triumphs, leaving no descendants, leaving no debts, only a name. And this name still sounds like a whisper of the forbidden. Bella Otero, the woman whom neither titles, nor millions, nor love could hold, because she belonged to no one, not even to herself.